Have you ever wondered how a small idea, born in a quiet garage in California, grew into one of the most powerful companies on Earth? A company that didn't just make devices, it changed how we live, how we talk, how we connect, and even how we dream. This is the story of Apple, a story of two dreamers, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who started with nothing but curiosity and courage. It's a story about taking risks when the world doubts you, about turning mistakes into masterpieces, and about believing so deeply in your vision that it refuses to fade even decades later. So as you lie down and let your thoughts slow, allow this story to guide you through sleepless nights, through failure, through fire, and into the light of a dream that changed the world. And if stories like this calm your mind or inspire your heart, take a second to subscribe, tap the like button, and join me again for more stories of people who turned impossible dreams into reality. Now let's go back to where it all began. It started in a quiet neighborhood in Los Altos, California. The year was 1976. The air was warm, the streets were calm, and most people were asleep by 10. No one imagined that inside one small house, history was quietly being written. Steve Jobs was only 21. He had dropped out of college, but his mind never stopped searching. He was full of ideas, full of energy, and sometimes full of fire. He saw things differently. Where others saw machines, he saw possibilities. And then there was Steve Wozniak. Woz, as his friends called him. Woz was gentle, humble, and brilliant. He loved electronics more than anything. To him, computers were like puzzles, pieces waiting to fit. He could spend hours sitting quietly, soldering wires, lost in his world of circuits. The two Steves were opposites in many ways. Jobs was the dreamer, the salesman, the storyteller. Wozniak was the builder, the thinker, the craftsman, but together they made something rare, a balance between vision and creation. One day, Woz showed Jobs a small computer he had built for fun. It could connect to a screen and type letters, something amazing at the time. Jobs looked at it and saw not just a hobby, but the future. He said, "We can sell this." And just like that, Apple was born. They set up a tiny workshop in Jobs' parents' garage. The space was small and smelled of oil and dust. There were boxes stacked everywhere, a wooden workbench, and wires scattered on the floor. They worked late into the night, soldering, testing, building. Sometimes music played softly from a radio. Sometimes it was silent, except for the clicking of metal and the hum of electricity. Jobs didn't have money to start a company, so he sold his Volkswagen van. Woz sold his calculator, his favourite one. It wasn't much, but it was enough to buy parts for 50 computers. They named their creation the Apple One. It didn't look like much, just a board of chips and wires. No fancy box, no keyboard, no monitor, but it worked, and it worked beautifully. A local computer shop called the Byte Shop agreed to buy 50 units. Jobs and Wozniak were thrilled and terrified. They had no company yet, no factory, no team. Just two guys in a garage with a deadline. They built each unit by hand, one by one. Their fingers burned from soldering irons, their eyes hurt from staring at circuits. But they kept going because they believed. When they delivered the 50 computers, they got their first real check. It wasn't just money. It was proof that their dream could be real. That little garage with its messy tables and tired faces became the birthplace of one of the greatest companies in history. But at that moment, they didn't know it yet. They were just two friends, following curiosity, chasing something bigger than themselves. Soon, Apple would grow. Soon, the world would change. But it all began right there, in a simple California garage on quiet nights filled with dreams, courage, and light. Apple's name started to travel from one town to another, one conversation to the next. People were beginning to hear about two young men building something strange, something new. Steve Jobs was restless. He wasn't satisfied with the Apple One. To him, it was only the beginning. He wanted a computer that wasn't just a box of circuits, but something that spoke to people, something alive. He could see it in his mind. A computer small enough to fit on a desk, bright enough to catch the eye, and simple enough that anyone, a student, a teacher, a family, could use it. Steve Wozniak, quiet and gentle, listened carefully. He wasn't a businessman. He just loved creating things that worked beautifully. He wanted to make something elegant inside, clean code, neat circuits, perfect design. So, night after night, they worked again. Wires on the floor, coffee cups on the table, the warm hum of machines filling the little space. Out of that rhythm, their patience, their hope, came the Apple II, a small computer with color graphics, a plastic case, and a keyboard that felt good under your fingers. When you turned it on, it lit up the room all of color and sound. For 1977, it felt like the future had arrived early. When they showed it at a computer fair in California, people gathered like moths to light. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. No one had ever seen a computer that looked so inviting. It wasn't a box of wires anymore. It was something people wanted to touch, to try, to take home. Orders started pouring in. Investors began calling. And soon, Apple became a real company with an office, a team, and a dream that was growing fast. In just a few years, Apple became one of the fastest growing companies in America. Magazines started writing about the Apple miracle. Jobs was on the cover of Time. He wore black turtlenecks, spoke with confidence, and dreamed even bigger. But deep inside, he still had that fire, the need to make something perfect. Every design, every detail mattered to him. He would argue over the shape of a button, the color of a box, the sound of a start-up chime. To him, design wasn't decoration, it was communication. That's when he started dreaming of a new machine, a computer with windows, icons, and a mouse. He called the project Macintosh. A computer with a screen You could click, not code. You had to type. It became his obsession. It sounded impossible at the time, but Jobs didn't care about limits. He cared about vision. The Macintosh team worked like a family, and sometimes like a storm. Jobs pushed them hard, demanding impossible deadlines, expecting nothing less than brilliance. Some called him difficult, others called him inspiring. Maybe he was both. Late nights turned into early mornings. People slept under their desks, but they believed because Steve made them believe. He told them, "We're not just making a computer. We're making a tool for the mind." In 1984, the world finally saw it. Apple launched the Macintosh with a commercial that felt like a movie. A woman threw a hammer through a screen, breaking free from control. It was bold, strange, and unforgettable, just like Apple. The Macintosh was beautiful, a friendly box with a smile on its face when it started up. People fell in love, but the love didn't last. The Mac was expensive and it was slow, and soon sales began to fall. Jobs' dream machine wasn't ready for the real world yet. Inside Apple, tension started to grow. Some thought Jobs was too controlling. Others believed he was the only one who could lead. The board had to make a choice. And Steve Jobs, the heart of the company, the man who once sold computers from his garage, was about to face the hardest chapter of his life. And soon, the man who had started Apple would find himself pushed out of his own company. But like every great story, this was not the end. It was only the turning point. By the mid-1980s, Apple had grown from a dream in a garage to a company worth millions. But success sometimes can be louder than the people who built it. Inside Apple's bright glass offices, the mood was heavy. The same place that once echoed with laughter and ideas now carried quiet tension. Steve Jobs, only 30, walked the hallways with restless energy. His ideas came faster than most could follow. He wanted perfection. He wanted magic. He wanted Apple to feel alive again. But not everyone saw what he saw. The Macintosh, his proud creation, was beautiful, friendly, and full of charm. Yet behind that charm, it was slow, expensive, and too limited for business users. The excitement faded, sales slipped, and pressure built. At the top of Apple, two visions began to collide. Jobs, the dreamer, wanted to push boundaries. John Sculley wanted to protect what Apple had. They had once been close friends. Jobs had chosen Sculley himself, saying, "Do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or come with me and change the world?" But dreams, when too strong, can pull people apart. Meetings became battles. Arguments turned personal. The creative fire that once built Apple was now burning from the inside. And one morning in 1985, in a quiet boardroom in Cupertino, everything changed. The board sided with Sculley. Jobs was stripped of his power. Just like that, the man who had built Apple from nothing was forced out of his own company. There were no cameras, no goodbye speeches, just silence. A heavy kind of silence that sits in your chest. He left the office, walked through the parking lot, and disappeared into the California sunlight. For the first time in his life, Steve Jobs had no company, no plan, and no direction. But life has a strange rhythm. Sometimes it takes everything away to give you something better. Instead of giving up, Jobs started over. He founded a new company called Next. It was small, quiet, full of young engineers with big dreams. They worked in dark rooms, lit by the glow of computer screens. They wanted to build the most advanced computer ever made. The Next computer was elegant, a perfect black cube with power beyond its time. It was fast, strong, and too expensive for almost everyone. The company didn't take off. But that didn't matter. Jobs wasn't chasing money anymore. He was chasing beauty, chasing meaning. And then another opportunity appeared. A small animation studio from George Lucas was for sale. It had talented artists, a few old computers, and almost no future. But when Jobs saw their work, something inside him lit up again. He saw imagination. He saw art and technology coming together, just like his dream at Apple. He bought the company and called it Pixar. For years, both Next and Pixar struggled. They made little money. Jobs spent everything he had. There were long nights, quiet doubts, and the lonely kind of silence that only dreamers know. But he kept going. He believed, as always, that something beautiful was waiting at the end of the struggle. And then one day in 1995, Pixar released a movie. It was called Toy Story. The world stopped to watch. Children laughed, adults cried. It was the first fully computer animated film in history, and it was a masterpiece. Toy Story didn't just make money, it made history. Suddenly, Steve Jobs was back in the spotlight, not as the boy who failed, but as the man who returned. Pixar became a global name. Jobs became a billionaire once again. But somewhere far away in a quiet boardroom at Apple, things were falling apart. The company he had left was now struggling to survive. Too many products, too little direction, and no clear soul. Apple was dying. And fate, in its strange, poetic way, was preparing to bring Steve Jobs home. Back to the place where it all began. Back to the dream that never truly left him. Because some fires, no matter how long they burn quietly, are never meant to go out. It was 1996. Outside, the tech world was moving fast. New companies were rising. New computers, new ideas, new names. But Apple, the once shining star, was falling apart. Its products looked strange, its direction unclear. Inside the company, people whispered the same question: can Apple survive? Sales were dropping. Investors were losing faith. Even loyal fans began to walk away. And in the middle of that storm, someone quietly spoke a name: Steve Jobs. It had been over 10 years since he left. Many thought he'd never come back. But deep inside, everyone knew ... If anyone could save Apple, it was him. That same year, Apple made a bold move. They decided to buy Next, the small company Jobs had built after leaving. What they didn't fully realize was they weren't just buying software. They were bringing home their lost heartbeat. When Steve walked back into Apple's headquarters, it wasn't with fireworks or fanfare. He came quietly, simply observing, watching what had become of his creation. The company was drowning in products. So many models, so many versions, each one fighting for meaning. Jobs sat through meetings, listened to endless plans, and then finally said, "This is crazy." He drew a simple cross on a whiteboard. At the top he wrote, "Consumer." At the bottom, "Professional." On the left, "Desktop." On the right, "Portable." 4 boxes and 4 directions, that's all. Everything else, gone. It was harsh, but it was what Apple needed. Clarity, focus, simplicity. Soon after, Steve became Apple's CEO again. Not the young rebel from the garage days, but a calmer, sharper man. One who had lost, learned, and evolved. And just like that, the rebuilding began. The first big test came with design. Steve met a British designer named Jony Ive. Quiet, precise, with a love for clean, honest shapes. Together they dreamed of something new, a computer that didn't look like a machine, but like a piece of art. Months later, they introduced it to the world. The iMac. It wasn't grey or dull like every other computer. It was bright blue, round, transparent, and full of life. When Steve stepped on stage, the audience could feel it, that electric sense of wonder returning. He smiled and said, "This is not just a computer, this is Apple reborn." The iMac exploded in sales. Stores couldn't keep up with demand. People loved it. It was different. For the first time in years, people were excited about Apple again. The company's heartbeat returned. The spirit was alive. Still, deep in his heart, he knew this was only the beginning. He wanted something greater, something that would connect everything. Music, communication, the internet, all in one small device. In 2001, he introduced something tiny, simple, and white. He would call it a revolution in your pocket, the iPod. It could hold 1,000 songs in your pocket, 1,000 moments, 1,000 memories. When he said those words, the crowd gasped. It wasn't just a device, it was freedom. The iPod changed everything. It redefined Apple, brought in new fans, and made the world fall in love with simplicity again. Soon, people everywhere were walking with white earphones, tapping their fingers to invisible music. From there, Apple kept building one step at a time. New design, new energy, new dreams. And while the world saw innovation, what Steve Jobs was really doing was building a bridge between art and technology, between the heart and the machine. The company was no longer just surviving, it was thriving. But deep inside Jobs, a bigger vision was growing, something far beyond computers or music. He wanted to create a device that could fit in your hand and carry your entire world. Something that would change the way humans lived, worked, and dreamed. That dream would soon become the most iconic invention in modern history, the iPhone. But before that revolution began, Steve Jobs would have to face his greatest test yet, his health, his legacy, and the limits of time itself. The year was 2007. The world was changing fast. Laptops were smaller. The internet was growing. And people were starting to carry tiny music players in their pockets. But for Steve Jobs, that wasn't enough. He wanted something more. Something simple, beautiful, and powerful enough to hold the world in your hand. For years, Apple had been secretly working on a device that would bring everything together: music, calls, messages, and the internet, all in one. No one outside the company knew. Even inside, only a small team had access. They worked in quiet rooms under bright white lights, testing screens and circuits, redesigning again and again. It wasn't easy. Many times it almost failed. The touchscreen broke. The software froze. The phone dropped calls. But Jobs pushed on. He told his team, "Don't stop until it feels perfect in your hand." And then one bright January morning in San Francisco, it happened. Steve Jobs stepped onto the stage at the Moscone Center. He was wearing his usual black turtleneck, blue jeans, and sneakers. The lights dimmed, the room went silent. Everyone knew something big was coming. He began slowly, his voice calm but confident. "Today," he said, "we're introducing 3 revolutionary products. A widescreen iPod with touch controls. A revolutionary mobile phone. And a breakthrough internet communicator." Then, with a little smile, he repeated the list again. An iPod, a phone, and an internet communicator. He looked at the crowd and asked, "Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device." And just like that, the world changed. The screen behind him lit up with one simple word: iPhone. The audience gasped. People stood, they cheered, clapped, shouted. It wasn't just another product launch, it was a cultural moment. A moment that would reshape everyday life. The iPhone didn't just combine technology, it connected people. It made the internet personal, touchable, alive. No buttons, just a screen, smooth, bright, responsive. You could scroll with a single finger, zoom with a gentle pinch, and watch the world come alive in your palm. When Apple stores finally opened their doors that summer, lines wrapped around city blocks. People waited overnight, not just to buy a phone, but to be part of something new. The iPhone was more than a device. It was a revolution in how humans communicate. And with every swipe and tap, Apple's dream of putting technology into everyone's hands became real. But for Steve Jobs, this wasn't only about selling phones. It was about creating experiences, things that felt right, things that people didn't just use but loved. In the following years, the iPhone grew smarter, faster, and sleeker. Each new version brought something new. Apps, cameras, maps, music, games, and eventually the App Store. Suddenly people could build their own worlds inside a tiny glass screen. A new kind of life began. Digital, connected, instant. Apple had not just built a product, it had built a platform, a gateway to the future. And through it all, Steve Jobs remained at the center, guiding every curve, every shade of light, every sound that played when you touched the screen. He once said, "Design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works." That idea became the heartbeat of Apple's philosophy. Simple, clear, human. Behind every sleek line, there was patience. Behind every innovation, there was courage. And behind every product, there was love. For craft, for detail, for people. By 2010, Apple was no longer just a company. It was a part of culture. People used iPhones to wake up, to talk, to find directions, to capture sunsets, to listen to music, and to connect with loved ones. The device had become an extension of the human experience. Yet as Apple rose higher and higher, something was quietly happening behind the scenes. Steve Jobs was getting sick. He didn't talk about it much. He kept smiling, kept presenting, kept inspiring, but inside his body was fighting. Still, he kept going because his mission wasn't finished. He wanted to make one last mark, one final masterpiece. And in 2010, he revealed it. A thin glass rectangle that fit perfectly between the phone and the laptop, the iPad. Once again, people doubted him. They said no one needed it. But then they held it, touched it, and realized it wasn't just a gadget. It was something beautiful. Art, books, movies, memories, all in one simple touch. That was Steve's magic. He didn't just build technology, he built emotion. And in doing so, he changed how humans experience the world. By the time he left this world in 2011, his legacy was already timeless. But Apple, the company he built in a dusty garage, was only getting started. What began as a dream between two young men had now become a trillion-dollar empire shaping how billions of people live, work, and dream. And yet in every Apple product today, in every soft click, every gentle curve, every bright white glow, you can still feel him there. The man who believed that technology should not only work, but feel human. 2011 was a year the world stopped to grieve. Steve Jobs, the dreamer, the rebel, the face of Apple, was gone. His body failed, but his vision didn't. Because by then, Apple had become more than a company. It was a part of people's lives. Outside Apple stores, candles flickered. People wrote messages on sticky notes and glass walls. Some cried, some smiled through tears. Everywhere, from New York to Tokyo, you could feel it. A silent gratitude for a man who made the future feel closer. Inside Apple, the question was quiet but heavy. What now? Tim Cook, who had worked beside Steve for years, stepped up as the new CEO. He wasn't loud or wild or fiery like Jobs. He was calm, thoughtful, steady. He knew he could never replace Steve. No one could. But he could protect the vision. Under Cook, Apple didn't chase chaos. It chased consistency. Each product sharper, cleaner, smoother. The iPhone grew up. The Mac became faster, lighter, stronger. The Apple Watch arrived, small, quiet, and personal. A piece of technology that cared about your health, your heart, your life. Apple began to change shape. From a tech company into something softer, more human. It wasn't just selling products. It was building trust. A design language that whispered simplicity. A brand that made you feel safe, inspired, understood. With every update, Apple reminded the world perfection isn't loud. It's quiet. Then came the services, Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, Apple Arcade, Apple Fitness. Suddenly, Apple wasn't just in your pocket. It was in your home, your playlist, your workouts, your family time. It had quietly built an ecosystem, a web of technology that felt seamless, alive. In 2018, Apple became the first US company to reach a $1 trillion market value. And through it all, one thing never changed. The heartbeat Steve left behind. That relentless drive to create something beautiful and useful. To combine art and engineering until the line between them disappeared. Apple's legacy wasn't just about gadgets or profits. It was about belief that creativity and logic could live together, that technology could feel human, simplicity could change the world. In a world racing toward artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and endless noise, Apple stayed grounded in one idea: make it meaningful. Because the best innovation isn't what amazes you once, it's what quietly improves your life every day. More than a decade after Steve's passing, his presence still lingers. In the rounded corners of every screen, in the careful silence before each keynote, in the words whispered inside the company halls. What would Steve say? He may be gone, but his thinking lives on. In every designer who refuses to settle, every engineer who rewrites the rules, every dreamer who dares to believe that different can change everything. Apple's story is proof that a dream, when guided by purpose, can outlive its creator. It can grow, evolve, and echo through generations. So as you listen, maybe lying in bed with the soft glow of your phone lighting the room, remember this: what began in a dusty garage still lives in your hands. Not as a device, but as a symbol of human imagination. And maybe someday someone will hold your creation the same way, with quiet awe, because legacies aren't built in a day. They're built one belief at a time. Close your eyes, take a slow breath, let the noise of the world fade for a moment. Think back to that small garage in California. Just two young men, a wooden table, a few wires, and a dream. They didn't have money, they didn't have fame, but they had something far greater. It is belief. Belief that ideas matter. Belief that design could have a soul. Belief that a single spark, if protected, could light up the world. And they were right, because today that same spark sits in your hand, in your pocket. It wakes you up in the morning. It helps you connect, create, learn, and live. That's the quiet power of human imagination. It travels farther than its creator ever could. Steve once said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." Maybe he was right. Maybe the world doesn't change in explosions or noise. Maybe it changes in whispers, in late nights, in quiet rooms where someone dares to think differently. You see, the story of Apple isn't really about technology. It's about courage. The courage to question. The courage to fail. The courage to start even when no one believes in you yet. And maybe tonight, as you rest, you can let that thought settle in your heart that you also carry the same potential. You don't need to build a company to make an impact. You just need to create something honest, something that makes life a little better, a little brighter for someone else. That's what legacy truly means. Not fame, not power, but leaving behind something that keeps giving even after you're gone. So tonight, as you drift into sleep, imagine the soft hum of that old garage, the quiet clicking of keys, the sound of two dreamers building the future, one idea at a time. Let it remind you, greatness doesn't start loud, it starts small. It starts with you. And maybe, just maybe, the next story the world falls in love with will begin in your hands.